Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. If the cat wants to vote, meow meow. If the mouse is going to win, squeak squeak. Sophie was humming her new hit, Funky Candidate Cat, swaying slightly in her office chair while stacking papers and using a stapler as a microphone. The workday was already over, and the building was pretty much empty. At least that's what Sophie thought. Wearing a blazer one size too big and shoes that made a click-clack sound with every step, she was performing with heart. She even did the choreography, which included a dramatic meow, a Broadway-worthy head toss, and an awkward little hip shake. But behind her, someone had shown up at the office door. It was Marcus, the company's CEO, the most feared man, respected, expressionless, who never smiled, and there he was, watching that performance like he'd just seen an alien during prime time. Sophie, unaware of her VIP audience, kept going. Vote for the cat. He's the king of ethics. He meows in the Senate. He's just fantastic. Marcus crossed his arms. Still holding the folder he came back to retrieve. For a second, just 1 second, the stiffness in his face faded. The corner of his mouth curved up, almost invisible, but real. He smiled. For the first time in 20 years, a phenomenon rarer than a solar eclipse and a leap year that falls on a Friday holiday. Sophie, turning with a dramatic spin, came face to face with him. The scream echoed. She dropped a pile of folders, tripped over the swivel chair, hit her knee on the desk, and in the panic dropped her purse on the floor, spilling lipsticks, gum, and a tiny rubber duck. My ninja boss, did you teleport here? Marcus cleared his throat, but his mouth was twitching. He was clearly trying not to laugh. I just came back for a document I forgot, he said, voice steady. But his eyes betrayed the chaos within. Sophie, trying to keep some dignity while picking up the duck, said, I swear this song has social depth. It's about feline representation in politics. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Sophie stood up, adjusting the blazer that had its zipper stuck in her pantyhose. Wait a second. She squinted, staring at his face, like she was examining a valuable painting. That was a smile, wasn't it? It was, right? I saw it. Can I call the New York Times? Marcus looked away, returning to his serious posture. Do you always sing that when you think no one's watching? Sophie shrugged, still out of breath. Only when I'm really happy or really tired or slightly low on blood sugar. She held out the documents to him, but dropped half of them again in the process. Marcus bent down to help, and for a moment, their eyes met. The silence wasn't as awkward as it should have been. Is your shift over, Miss Sophie? She scrambled to pick up the scattered papers, her face still flushed. Technically, yes, but you know how it is. First week, I want to show dedication and a sense of humor, maybe too much. Marcus watched her a second longer than necessary, then took the folder, turned to leave, and said, Have a good evening, Miss Candidate Cat. Good night, boss. Sophie stood there holding the rubber duck in her hand, eyes wide and heart pounding. She ran to the window and watched Marcus step into the elevator. He smiled. I saw it. That's worth a prize. A bonus? Maybe a raise? She muttered to herself. Inside the elevator, Marcus stood still, staring at his reflection in the mirror doors. Slowly, the corner of his mouth turned up again. A little smile. The security guard in the corner of the elevator choked on his own spit. Mr. Stone, did you just smile? Marcus didn't answer. But the smile, now full, lasted all the way to the ground floor. Meanwhile, Sophie was tidying up the mess in the office, murmuring, Congrats, Sophie. You just sang a funky political cat song in front of the scariest man in the building. If I still have a badge tomorrow, I'll consider it a win. Ha! But hey, she started with a disaster, followed up with a political meow, and ended up making the boss laugh. She started humming again, this time dancing with the rubber duck in her hand. Vote for the cat. He's the king of ethics. He meows in the Senate. He's just fantastic. And back in the elevator, Marcus was still trying to make sense of what exactly had happened in that office. But one thing was clear. After 20 years, something inside him had started to change. The next morning, Sophie arrived at the office like a detective on a secret mission. She had a small notepad in her purse with the title, Operation Big Smile. Step 1. Confirm if it was real. Step 2. Repeat the miracle. In the company cafeteria, she sat down with Emily from accounting and Daniel from marketing. Guys, you're not going to believe what happened yesterday, Sophie announced, stirring her coffee with a plastic spoon that made an annoying sound. "Let me guess," Emily said, biting into a muffin. "You found out the coffee from the machine is made of chalk dust?" "No, even better. I made Mr. Stone smile." Daniel nearly choked on his orange juice. "Sophie, sweetie, did you hit your head?" Marcus Stone wouldn't smile even if he won the lottery. "I saw it with these two eyes that'll one day be 6 feet under," Sophie insisted, pointing dramatically at her own eyes. It was a small smile, but a real one. "Grade A, certified, teeth showing and everything." Emily shook her head. "Honey, I've worked here for 5 years. I've seen that man in meetings, presentations, even at a Christmas party. His face never changes. It's like he's made of marble. Expensive marble," Daniel added. "The kind that costs more than my apartment." Sophie slammed her hand on the table, making the trays bounce. "Exactly. That's why this was historic. I have to make it happen again, you know, for science." Her two co-workers exchanged amused looks. "And how do you plan to do that?" Emily asked. Sophie smiled with the glow of someone who just discovered the cure for corporate boredom. "With the same song that worked yesterday, the funky candidate cat." "What?" Daniel frowned. "A Brazilian musical masterpiece adapted to American reality. You'll see." After lunch, Sophie began her campaign. First test, the elevator. When the doors closed with her and 3 other employees inside, Sophie began discreetly, "Vote for the cat. He's the king of ethics. He meows in the Senate. He's just fantastic." The others looked at her as if she just announced aliens had landed in Central Park. "Sorry, it's a relaxation technique," Sophie improvised, smiling nervously. On the 10th floor, the doors opened, and Marcus stepped in. Sophie nearly choked on her own saliva. He greeted everyone with a polite nod and turned his back to her. Sophie took a deep breath and whispered barely audibly, "If the cat wants to vote, meow, meow." Marcus's right eyebrow twitched slightly, just slightly, but Sophie saw it. "Bingo," she thought, trying not to jump with joy inside the elevator. When they reached the 20th floor, Marcus walked out without looking back. But Sophie could swear she saw him shake his head slightly, like someone trying to brush off a stubborn thought. Second test. Near the printer, Sophie was copying some reports when she saw Marcus walking down the hallway. She pretended to focus on the documents and began humming softly. "If the mouse is going to win, squeak, squeak." Marcus slowed his pace just for a fraction of a second. Sophie held back a laugh. It was working. The third test was an accident. Sophie walked into the ladies' room, humming the song, not realizing she had left the door slightly open. Outside, Marcus happened to be walking by on his way to a meeting. "Vote for the cat. He's the king of ethics. He meows in the Senate. He's just fantastic." Sophie's voice echoed through the empty hallway. Marcus stopped in his tracks. He looked around, making sure he was alone, and then a tiny smile appeared on his lips. He shook his head as if trying to pull himself together and continued on to his meeting. Sophie stepped out of the restroom and nearly bumped into Rachel from reception. "Were you singing in the bathroom?" Rachel asked, confused. It's a new therapy, very effective for stress." Sophie lied, blushing. At 3 p.m., chaos broke out in the office. Patricia, Marcus's executive assistant, ran down the halls like the building was on fire. "Emergency! Emergency!" Patricia shouted, waving her arms as she rushed through the hallway. Sophie and a few other employees gathered around her. "What happened?" Emily asked. "The Japanese investor arrived early. The meeting that was supposed to be tomorrow is happening today in 1 hour, and our official interpreter just called. She has food poisoning." Daniel gave a low whistle. "That's serious. Mr. Stone's been waiting on this investor for months." Patricia looked around, clearly panicking. "Does anyone here speak Japanese?" "Anything at all?" Total silence. Sophie timidly raised her hand. "I know how to say arigato and sayonara. Does that count?" Patricia looked at her like she was the last life raft on the Titanic. "You'll have to come with me." 5 minutes later, Sophie stood in front of Marcus's office door as Patricia knocked frantically. "Come in," came the firm voice of the CEO. Patricia shoved Sophie into the luxurious office. "Mr. Stone, we found a temporary solution for the interpreter issue." Marcus looked up from his papers and saw Sophie standing there like a lost penguin in the desert. "Sophie." He frowned. "She speaks Japanese." Patricia lied without hesitation. "And can pose as your experienced personal assistant. It'll give the company more credibility." Marcus looked at Sophie, then at Patricia, then back at Sophie again. "You speak Japanese?" he asked, clearly doubtful. "Well," Sophie swallowed hard, "I know how to say hello and goodbye, and I can apologize, which will probably come in handy. Marcus rubbed his face, clearly regretting everything about the moment. The investor arrives in 50 minutes. Great. I'm so doomed, Sophie muttered, starting to panic. Marcus sighed deeply, like a man realizing he was about to skydive with no training. Just smile and take notes, or at least try to, he said, already visibly regretting his own words. Sophie's eyes widened, processing the instruction, take notes or smile. Because doing both at once, boss, is multitasking on another level. And there it was again, the barely noticeable movement at the corner of Marcus's mouth. He quickly covered it with a cough and looked back down at his documents. Patricia, get Sophie a proper blazer. She has 40 minutes to turn into a convincing personal assistant. Patricia dragged Sophie out of the office. Come on, sweetheart. We've got a miracle to perform. As she was being pulled down the hallway, Sophie muttered to herself. From new secretary to fake interpreter and assistant in 24 hours, if this isn't career growth, I don't know what is. Back in the office, Marcus was alone, flipping through papers. For the third time in 2 days, a stubborn smile tried to sneak across his face as he remembered Sophie's words. He shook his head, trying to focus on the fast-approaching meeting. 40 minutes later, Sophie was unrecognizable. Patricia had pulled off a miracle, a navy blue suit that almost fit, heels that only pinched a little, and even a pair of fake glasses to give her a more intellectual vibe. Remember, Patricia whispered as she straightened Sophie's blazer. Keep your posture upright, speak softly, and for the love of everything holy, don't sing. Sophie nodded nervously and headed toward the conference room where Marcus was already waiting. He looked her up and down, clearly impressed by the transformation, but kept his face neutral. Ready? He asked, adjusting his tie. Define ready? Sophie replied, trying to walk gracefully in the borrowed shoes. Because if you mean completely lost, but willing to try, then yes. Marcus sighed and opened the conference room door. The Japanese investor, Mr. Kenji Yamamoto, was already seated. Flanked by 2 assistants, he was a middle-aged man, impeccably dressed with a serious expression that made Marcus look like a stand-up comedian. Mr. Yamamoto. Marcus bowed respectfully. It's an honor to have you here. He pulled out his phone, opened a translation app, and quickly typed. The phone spoke in a robotic Japanese voice, making Mr. Yamamoto raise an eyebrow. Sophie stepped forward, trying not to trip over the projector cable. This is my personal assistant, Sophie Carter, Marcus said into the translator. The app translated it into something that sounded like, this is my personal banana, Sophie Carrot. Mr. Yamamoto blinked several times, visibly confused. Marcus quickly typed a correction. I apologize for not having a professional interpreter. Sophie is my assistant and knows a few Japanese words that might help with communication. This time, the app said something about experienced cats and magical Japanese words. Sophie decided it was time to step in. She bowed politely and said, Arigatou gozaimasu. Mr. Yamamoto smiled for the first time, clearly touched and surprised by the effort. Ah, you speak Japanese, he replied in heavily accented English. Sophie's eyes widened. He spoke English. All that drama with the translator for nothing, just a tiny bit. She lied, holding up her pinky, like, teeny tiny. Marcus shot her a glare, but motioned for everyone to sit down. The meeting officially began. Marcus presented the company's numbers, while Sophie pretended to take important notes. In reality, she was doodling little cats in the margins of the official document and writing her grocery list. Our company grew 30% over the last year, Marcus explained. Sophie nodded enthusiastically as if mentally translating. But she was really wondering if she should buy whole milk or skim. Impressive, Mr. Yamamoto commented. Sophie perked up. Yes, very impressive, Sophie agreed, clapping her hands enthusiastically. Marcus looked at her with a mix of horror and disbelief. 15 minutes later, Sophie got up to serve coffee. It was a simple task. Grab the tray and hand out the cups. But Sophie had a unique talent for making simple things complicated. First, she tripped over the laptop cable, making the screen wobble. Then, she mixed up the drinks, giving espresso to someone who asked for decaf and green tea to Marcus, who hadn't asked for anything at all. Sorry, she mumbled, trying to fix the mix-up. Only to spill sugar onto the investor's folder. But instead of getting upset, Mr. Yamamoto started to laugh. You are very, how you say, authentic, very different from assistants I know. Sophie smiled, unsure if it was a compliment or a critique. I'm definitely one of a kind, hopefully in a good way. While Marcus talked about market projections, Sophie continued making her special notes. Instead of writing on the official minutes, she was doodling on the back of an important contract, sketching a comic strip about business cats. Mr. Yamamoto noticed and leaned over to look. "Is this a cat in a suit?" Sophie blushed. Yes. A visual metaphor for feline leadership in the corporate world." The investor burst into laughter. "Brilliant. You Americans are so creative." Marcus watched the scene, unsure whether to laugh or cry, but his eyes were shining in a way he didn't recognize. It was pure amusement. As the meeting went on, Sophie relaxed and started being herself. She asked silly questions that led to interesting answers, told a joke about cultural differences that made the investor laugh until he cried, and even did a tiny dance when Marcus mentioned market movement. "This is the most entertaining meeting I've ever had," declared Mr. Yamamoto. Wiping his eyes, "You have made my day very special." When Marcus finally got to the key point, the investment proposal, Sophie decided it was time for a toast. She picked up the leftover orange juice from the snack tray and raised her glass. "A toast to our future partnership." Mr. Yamamoto loved the idea and lifted his cup of tea. "To the future," said Marcus, raising his glass of water. "To mutual success," added the investor. Sophie, caught up in the moment, blurted out, "Merci beaucoup, samurai." Everyone froze. 3 long seconds of silence. Then Mr. Yamamoto burst into laughter so loud the receptionist on the floor below probably heard it. "Merci, samurai," he repeated, slapping the table. "That is fantastic. French and Japanese together. International." He turned to Marcus. "Mr. Stone, I accept the proposal. This company has something special. You have energy, have fun, are different. This is exactly what my company needs." Marcus blinked several times, trying to process what had just happened. "Serious?" Sophie asked momentarily, forgetting to use formal English. "Very serious," confirmed Mr. Yamamoto, still laughing. "Sophie, you are a wonderful surprise." After Mr. Yamamoto and his assistants left, still laughing and chatting about the most entertaining meeting of their lives, Marcus and Sophie were left alone in the room. Marcus watched her in silence for a long moment. Sophie was trying to organize the doodled papers, nervously biting her lip. "I kind of ruined everything, didn't I?" she murmured. "You just closed the biggest deal in this company's history," Marcus replied slowly, using French, drawing cats, and toasting with orange juice. Sophie stared at him. "Is that good or bad?" Marcus shook his head as if confused by his own thoughts. "You don't follow any rules, but somehow everything works out with you." In the elevator, heading down to the parking garage, Marcus finally broke the silence. "You'll continue accompanying me as my personal assistant. We have another event tonight." Sophie looked at him. "Oh, so now this is corporate theater. Will there be costumes?" Marcus gave her his usual impatient look, without answering. But Sophie could swear, once again, she saw that barely haver movement at the corner of his mouth. The elevator reached the parking level, and Sophie couldn't help but wonder what kind of adventure she was getting herself into this time. 6 hours later, Sophie was standing in front of the mirror in the ladies' room of a fancy dress boutique, questioning every life choice she had ever made. "This isn't a dress, it's a trap," she muttered, trying to breathe in the teal-blue gown she had rented for a price that seriously endangered her monthly budget. Emily's borrowed heels were making her feet scream for mercy, and the makeup she had done herself made her look like she was trying to enter a witness protection program. Marcus was waiting in the lobby of the Plaza Hotel, immaculate in his black tuxedo. When Sophie appeared at the top of the marble staircase, trying not to trip, he was speechless for a few seconds. "You look," he began. "Ridiculous," Sophie cut in, adjusting the dress for the 10th time. "I was going to say beautiful, but ridiculous works, too," he replied. And Sophie couldn't tell if that was a compliment or an insult. The ballroom was filled with New York's elite. Women wore jewelry worth more than cars, chatting with men whose watches were worth entire apartments. Sophie glanced around and whispered, "I feel like a microwave pizza at a French banquet." Marcus almost smiled, but held back. "Just smile, and be yourself." "It worked with the Japanese investor. Being myself is exactly what got me here," Sophie muttered, grabbing a champagne flute from a passing tray. The first hour was a parade of awkward introductions. Sophie greeted billionaires like they were neighbors from her apartment building and answered questions about contemporary art, with comments about cartoons. "And you, dear, what do you think of Thompson's recent work?" asked a platinum-haired lady wearing a pearl necklace. Sophie was chewing on a salmon canapé like it was a fried chicken snack. "Oh, I prefer the classics. Really, Tom and Jerry never go out of style. The woman blinked, confused, but Marcus quickly redirected the conversation. Later, Sophie was chatting with a group when she spotted a guy with a mustache, loudly bragging about his yachts. I have 3 vessels, you know, one in France, another in the Bahamas. Sophie interrupted innocently. Wow, Mr. Mustache, you must spend more time at sea than a pirate. The man turned red. People around them choked on their drinks, and Marcus had to fake a coughing fit to cover up his laugh. It's Mr. Baxter, the man corrected, clearly offended. Sorry, Mr. Baxter Mustache, Sophie replied sincerely. Not understanding what she'd done wrong, Marcus quickly pulled her to the other side of the ballroom. Sophie, you can't just go around giving nicknames like Mr. Mustache to billionaire moguls. But he has a mustache, she protested, and a very nice one, by the way. That's when the night took an unexpected turn. A stunning woman in a red dress that definitely cost more than Sophie's entire car walked up with a smile that never reached her eyes. Marcus, darling, she said in a silky voice that sounded like poisoned honey. Sophie immediately saw Marcus's body tense up. Isabella, he responded stiffly. Isabella was everything. Sophie was not. Tall, elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a posture that screamed, I belong here. Her icy blue eyes scanned Sophie from head to toe like she was appraising a second-hand item. And who is this little creature? Isabella asked with a fake smile. Sophie Carter, my assistant, Marcus answered rigidly. Oh, how cute, Isabella chuckled, but it wasn't a warm laugh. Marcus has always had a soft spot for unusual employees. Sophie felt her blood boil. Unusual as in not being fake. From their nails to their personality, Isabella's smile faltered for a split second, then quickly returned. Marcus, darling, we need to talk alone, she said, completely ignoring Sophie and grabbing Marcus's arm possessively. I'm sure you're tired of this rebellious phase. Why don't we go back to what we had? We were perfect together. Marcus looked at Sophie, then at Isabella, clearly uncomfortable. Sophie could see the panic building behind his eyes, and then he did something completely unexpected. Actually, Isabella, I'm engaged. The entire ballroom seemed to go silent. Isabella's eyes widened, and Sophie nearly dropped her champagne glass. Engaged? Isabella repeated, stunned. To who? Marcus took a deep breath and looked straight at Sophie. To Sophie. Sophie choked spectacularly on the champagne, coughing so hard that half the room turned to look. What? She managed to exclaim between coughs. Marcus quickly grabbed her hand and forced a smile, one that almost looked romantic if Sophie didn't already know his usual stone-faced expression. She stared at him, eyes wide. The whole world felt frozen in that moment. Isabella was pale as a sheet, and Sophie could hear whispers spreading through the ballroom like wildfire. How much is this going to cost me? Sophie muttered through a clenched smile. Because I charge a lot to fake love in public. Marcus squeezed her hand tighter. Whatever it takes. Please. Sophie glanced around. All those rich, powerful people were staring at her like she was some rare zoo animal. Isabella looked like she was silently plotting an elaborate revenge. And then Sophie did what she did best. She improvised. She turned to Isabella with a sweet smile. Sorry, Isabella. Is that right? You'll have to find another ex to win back. This one's already taken. Isabella stood there, mouth agape. Around them, New York's elite murmured with excitement, watching the drama unfold like a live soap opera. This is ridiculous, Isabella snapped, regaining composure. You two barely know each other. Love doesn't have a stopwatch, sweetheart, Sophie replied, fully stepping into the role. Sometimes it strikes out of nowhere, like lightning. Marcus looked at her with a mix of terror and admiration. Just then, a man with a professional camera approached. Mr. Stone. I'm with New York Social. Can we get a comment on the engagement? Before Marcus could say anything, Sophie stepped forward with the confidence of a red carpet veteran. Of course, we're very happy. Marcus is a wonderful man, even if his taste in music is questionable. The reporter scribbled frantically in his notepad. And when's the wedding? Sophie glanced at Marcus, who looked like he was mentally calculating the cost of fleeing the country. Soon, he said, his voice slightly strangled. The next morning, the gossip was everywhere. Magazine covers, celebrity blogs, news feeds. Lonely CEO announces surprise engagement to exotic secretary. Sophie woke up to her phone buzzing non-stop. She groaned and opened the first headline she saw. There it was, a photo of her and Marcus holding hands. She looked completely shocked, and he looked like he'd swallowed an entire lemon. Exotic secretary, she read aloud. Well, at least they didn't say weird. Her phone rang again. Marcus, she answered. Sophie, we need to talk urgently. 1 hour later, Sophie was sitting in Marcus's office, staring at a pile of newspapers and magazines spread across his desk. Every cover featured some variation of the same headline: Whirlwind Romance, Corporate Cinderella, and her personal favorite, Mysterious CEO, finally finds love with hilarious employee. Hilarious, Sophie said, picking up the magazine and waving it. At least they recognized my comedic talent. Marcus stood by the window, looking down at the swarm of photographers camped out on the sidewalk in front of the building. 17 paparazzi, he muttered. 17 people with professional cameras, waiting to document our every move. Sophie joined him at the window and gave the photographers a cheerful wave. The flashes started immediately. Sophie. Marcus pulled her away from the window. Don't do that. Why not? They seem nice. That one even smiled back. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sophie was starting to recognize as his maximum stress indicator. We need to talk about this, he said, motioning vaguely to the magazines. Sophie sat in the chair across from his desk and crossed her legs. All right, boss. Talk. The situation is out of control. He hesitated. But maybe it's not entirely bad. What do you mean? Marcus sat down behind the desk and clasped his hands. The board is thrilled. Our public image has never looked better. Stock went up 3% just this morning. Sophie nodded slowly. Go on. And there's an important deal in progress with Thompson and Associates. They're a traditional family-owned company. They value strong personal relationships. A 5-year-old bachelor CEO made them question my stability. Sophie started to see where this was going. You want me to keep pretending to be your fiancé for a limited time, just until we close the deal. Sophie leaned back in the chair, studying his face. And what do I get out of this? Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting her to negotiate. What do you mean? What do you get? Marcus. Darling. Sophie said in a sweet tone that fooled absolutely no one. Pretending to be madly in love with someone who has the emotional range of an ironing board is hard work. I deserve compensation. He stared at her for a long moment. What kind of compensation? Sophie flashed a smile that would make any salesperson proud. First, a raise. 20%. 10. Marcus replied instantly. 15. Second, extra time off every Friday afternoon. Impossible. Then every Monday morning. Marcus sighed. Fine. Third, car service for all public events. My feet still haven't recovered from those heels yesterday. Accepted. Fourth, chocolate in the office. The good kind, not those vending machine bars that taste like sweetened cardboard. Marcus looked genuinely confused. Chocolate? Swiss chocolate or Belgian? Your choice. Why chocolate? Because pretending to be in love makes me hungry. And hungry me is cranky me. And trust me, you don't want me cranky during this whole parade. Marcus paused, considering. Fine. Anything else? That's it for now. But I reserve the right to renegotiate if this situation gets messier. They shook hands, sealing the most surreal agreement either of them had ever made. 2 hours later, Sophie was already discovering that being a fake fiancé was surprisingly hard work. The phone wouldn't stop ringing with interview requests, event invitations, and even reality show offers. Reality show? Sophie repeated to Patricia, who was jotting down all the inquiries. Love in the workplace. Patricia read from a piece of paper. They want to follow you two around the office with cameras. Absolutely not, said Marcus, appearing in the doorway. Sophie looked at him, curious. Could be fun. Picture it. Tonight on Love in the Workplace, will the CEO smile during the budget meeting? Marcus ignored her and turned to Patricia. Accept only relevant corporate invitations that align with our business goals. Later that week, during a high-stakes meeting with potential investors from Thompson and Associates, Sophie realized her presence had an unexpected effect on business. The meeting was tense. The 3 Thompson executives, serious middle-aged men, sat stiffly around the table, clearly unimpressed by Marcus's technical presentation. Mr. Stone, said the eldest. Robert Thompson, your numbers are impressive, but we have some concerns about your company culture. Marcus braced himself for a dry debate about corporate policies. But then Sophie, seated beside him and pretending to take notes, more likely doodling cats again, let out a small, adorable sneeze. Excuse me, she said, grabbing a tissue. Bless you, Robert replied automatically. Thank you. Sorry, I think I'm allergic to excessive formality. The executives blinked, surprised. How do you mean? One of them asked. Sophie glanced at Marcus, who shot her a please, not now look. but she had already made up her mind. Well, you've been here an hour talking about charts and spreadsheets, but no one's asked once about the people who work here. Marcus might come off a bit robotic. She gave him a playful pat on the arm, but he truly cares about his employees. Sophie, Marcus muttered, but Robert looked intrigued. Go on. The other day he found out the receptionist's daughter was in the hospital. He paid for all the medical bills, didn't tell a soul, but I found out because I'm nosy and poke around where I probably shouldn't. Marcus stared at her in genuine surprise. He hadn't known, she knew, and there's more, Sophie went on, excited. He changed the entire maternity leave policy after one employee had to come back way too early after giving birth. Now moms get 6 months of paid leave. The Thompson executives exchanged looks. That wasn't in our report, Robert said. Raising an eyebrow, Sophie shrugged. Marcus is modest. He does good and hides it like a superhero in a suit. One of the executives chuckled. A superhero in a suit. Exactly. He fights corporate injustice and protects innocent employees. Sophie gestured dramatically. The only difference is, instead of a cape, he wears expensive ties. The whole room was laughing now, including Robert Thompson, who Sophie wasn't even sure knew how to smile. Miss Carter, Robert said, straightening his posture, your perspective on Mr. Stone is refreshing. Oh, I have plenty more where that came from. I could tell you about the time he stayed up all night helping the IT team fix a system crash, or when he— Sophie, Marcus cut in gently. I think they get the idea. Robert stood and extended his hand. Mr. Stone, consider the deal done. A company that inspires this kind of loyalty and fun is exactly what we're looking for. After the investors left, Marcus and Sophie were alone in the conference room. You knew about Rachel? Marcus asked quietly. About the medical bills? Sophie blushed slightly. I may overhear a little too much and ask a little too little, but it was really kind of you. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, as if he was seeing her in a completely new way. You just closed a $10 million deal by making me sound like a superhero in a suit. Technically, you are the superhero. I just translated it into human language. Marcus shook his head, still trying to process everything. Think you can keep pretending for another month? We've got more key meetings coming up, and apparently you have a positive effect on business. Sophie crossed her arms and looked him straight in the eyes. Does that include dinners, romantic photos, and letting me change the playlist in your car, because all that classical music is putting me into a light depression? Marcus hesitated. I'll consider it. And chocolate. Lots of chocolate. We already agreed on the chocolate. At that moment, Patricia appeared at the door, breathless. Mr. Stone, Manhattan Elite magazine wants to do a cover story on you two. Full photo shoot and interview on love in the corporate world. Sophie turned to Marcus. Romantic photo shoot? That's definitely worth double chocolate. Fine, he sighed. But no cat songs during the interview. Sophie grinned. I promise nothing. The next morning, Sophie woke up to the annoying sound of her alarm and the unmistakable chaos of photographers shouting her name outside the building. Sophie! Sophie! Over here! She peeked through the curtain and saw at least 10 paparazzi camped out on the sidewalk. Seriously, don't you people have homes? Sophie muttered, quickly shutting the curtain. 2 hours later, she was at the Manhattan Elite magazine studio, being styled, brushed, powdered, and dressed like a luxury doll. The chosen dress was a soft, elegant baby blue that made her nearly unrecognizable. Her hair had been transformed into a cascade of soft curls. You look stunning, said Linda, the makeup artist, ready to conquer the world. Sophie looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. I'm pretty sure this version of me could actually speak fluent Japanese. Marcus arrived at the studio 10 minutes later, as flawless as always, but Sophie noticed a new kind of tension in his shoulders. Nervous? She asked, adjusting his tie in a gesture that had become oddly natural. No, he lied, avoiding her eyes. The photographer, a dramatic man named Antonio, greeted them with open arms. There they are, the lovebirds. You're even more gorgeous in person, Sophie whispered to Marcus. He sounds like a children's show host on too much caffeine. Antonio positioned them in front of a sleek, minimalistic white backdrop. Perfect. Now I want natural love. Passion. Pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist. Sophie looked at Marcus. Pretend I'm holding Swiss chocolate. That should help. Marcus almost smiled, but held it in. The shoot began with basic poses. Hands clasped, dreamy gazes, radiant smiles. Sophie discovered she had a talent for this, tossing out jokes between shots that even made Marcus relax. Beautiful. Perfect. Antonio shouted. Now closer. That's it, Marcus. Hand on her cheek. Sophie. Look at him like he's the last slice of pizza on earth. That I can do, Sophie murmured, making Marcus let out a genuine laugh, which the camera captured perfectly. As the session went on, Antonio became more demanding. I need more chemistry, more intensity. You're in love. Show it. Sophie and Marcus exchanged a look. They both knew they were pretending. But there was something in the air, a tension neither of them could quite define. How about a little dance? Antonio suggested. Something romantic, intimate. A soft instrumental song began to play. Marcus hesitated, then offered his hand. Sophie took it, and they began to move slowly, smoothly. You dance well, Sophie murmured, a little surprised. Mandatory childhood lessons, he replied. My mother insisted. Mine insisted I learn how to change a tire. Different priority. Marcus chuckled quietly, and Sophie felt a strange flutter in her stomach. It wasn't hunger. Perfect. Perfect, Antonio exclaimed, snapping photos wildly. But I need more. More passion. More. More kiss, maybe? Sophie felt Marcus's body tense immediately. Kiss? She repeated, her voice slightly higher than usual. Just a little kiss, Antonio insisted. For the cover, it'll be iconic. Sophie looked at Marcus, who seemed to be mentally calculating if he could dig a tunnel out of the studio. It doesn't have to be a real kiss, she whispered, just lips touching, like in theater. Marcus nodded stiffly, like in theater. They got into position. Marcus gently placed his hands on Sophie's face. She closed her eyes, mentally bracing for a stage kiss. But fate, clearly in a humorous mood, had other plans. Just as they leaned in, Sophie stepped on the edge of the ornate Persian rug that decorated the studio. Her heel caught, and she lost her balance completely, flying toward Marcus like a runaway missile. He tried to catch her, but the impact threw them both off. Sophie slammed into his chest, and in their awkward attempt to stay upright, their lips met. Not a soft stage kiss. A real, full, accidental kiss. The camera's flash went off automatically. For 2 seconds that felt like forever. They stood like that. Sophie and Marcus in each other's arms, both too shocked to move. Oh my God, Antonio screamed. That was perfect. Pure magic. The corporate kiss of the century. The entire studio staff started clapping and cheering like they just witnessed a miracle. Sophie and Marcus quickly pulled apart, both flushed and visibly uncomfortable. That was Marcus started. Un accident? Sophie kutin fast. Total. Accident. Blame the rug. Accident? Antonio looked genuinely offended. That was art. You two have real chemistry. In the following days, the photo went viral. The magazine broke sales records, and the image of Sophie falling into Marcus's arms spread across the internet like wildfire. The memes came fast. The secretary who took down the CEO with love. When you trip and fall into your destiny tutorial. How to land a millionaire CEO in 3 easy steps. Sophie was in the office, scrolling through the comments on her phone, when Marcus walked in, looking visibly rattled. Did you see this? He asked, holding up his phone. I saw. We're famous, Sophie replied, trying to sound casual. At least now we have chemistry. Just need the periodic table to go with it. Marcus didn't laugh. He was pacing across the office like a caged animal. This is completely out of control. Marcus, relax. It's just a photo. In a week, no one will even remember. As if the universe couldn't resist the chance to prove her wrong, Patricia appeared at the door, holding an elegant envelope. Mr. Stone, this just came in. A very important invitation. Marcus opened the envelope, and his expression grew even more tense. What is it? Sophie asked. The annual Stone family ball, he said, his voice tight. My parents want to meet my future wife. Sophie felt her stomach drop. Your parents? As in, the people who created you? Exactly. She took the invitation from his hands and read aloud. Cordially invites Sophie Carter, future Mrs. Stone. She stopped. Mrs. Stone? Well, that escalated quickly. Marcus sank into his chair. The ball is next Saturday at the family mansion. Every Stone will be there, along with half of New York's elite, major investors, and the press. Definitely. Sophie looked at the golden embossed card, then at Marcus, who looked like he was having a silent existential crisis. So, I'm going to meet your parents, pretending to be your fiancé, at a gala surrounded by rich and powerful people while photographers document our every move. Basically, Sophie sat in the chair across from him. This definitely calls for triple chocolate and a crash course in etiquette, and maybe therapy afterward. Marcus finally looked at her. Do you still want to go through with this? Sophie thought about the accidental kiss, the weird flutter still in her stomach, the viral memes, and the absolute absurdity of it all. Of course, she said, surprising even herself. But you're going to owe me way more than chocolate after this. Marcus nodded, both relieved and terrified. Anything? Careful with those promises, Marcus Stone, Sophie said. I have a very vivid imagination when it comes to collecting favors. On Saturday night, Sophie sat in the passenger seat of Marcus's car, adjusting her gown for the 10th time. This time, she had chosen an emerald green dress, elegant but still very her. Nervous? Marcus asked, noticing how she kept fiddling with the strap of her purse. Me? Nervous? Sophie laughed, but the sound came out a bit too high-pitched. I'm just going to meet your entire family, pretending to be your fiancé, in a mansion full of rich and famous people. Why would I be nervous? Marcus drove in silence for a few minutes before speaking again. My parents are intense. Intense like they ask about retirement plans on first dates. Or intense like they hire private investigators to check your background. More like the second, he replied. Sophie couldn't tell if he was joking. She watched him as he drove. There was something different in his posture, a kind of tightness she hadn't seen, not even in the most high-pressure meetings. Marcus? Yes. Why didn't you smile for 20 years? The question came out more directly than she intended. Marcus almost hit the brakes. What? Everyone at the company talks about it. Marcus Stone never smiles. You're more likely to see a unicorn than the boss laughing. But why exactly 20 years? Marcus was quiet for so long. Sophie thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, in a low voice, he said, I lost someone important. Sophie felt the weight of his words. She had touched something delicate. I'm sorry. You didn't have to. He was my twin brother. Marcus interrupted quietly. Ethan, we were identical, but he was the opposite of me. Always laughing. Always making everyone laugh. Sophie didn't say anything. She just waited. He died in a car accident when we were 15. He was coming back from a party, wanted to surprise me with some silly thing he bought. Marcus posed. After that, smiling felt wrong, like I was betraying his memory. Sophie's eyes welled up. Marcus, it's not stupid. It's human. She took a breath. Do you really think your brother would have wanted you to stop smiling because of him? Marcus didn't answer, but something in his expression softened. I bet he was the kind of person who made everyone laugh, even when he was sad, Sophie continued gently. And if he were here now, I bet he'd be joking about you, pretending to date the clumsiest employee in the company. This time, Marcus smiled, a small, real smile. He would have loved you. You have the same questionable sense of humor. Sophie smiled back. So, when I make you laugh, it's not betrayal. It's remembering. 15 minutes later, they arrived at the Stone Mansion. Sophie looked out the window and swallowed hard. This isn't a house. It's a small country. The mansion was massive, with perfectly manicured gardens and a circular driveway already packed with luxury cars. Last chance to run, Marcus joked, though Sophie could see he was nervous too. And miss the chance to hear whatever embarrassing stories your parents have on you? Not a chance. They stepped into the grand hall, which was decorated with white and gold flowers. The guests were exactly what Sophie had imagined, elegant, sophisticated, and all of them seemed to instinctively know where the most expensive champagne flutes were. Marcus, a warm female voice called out. A graceful woman with silver hair styled to perfection and a radiant smile approached. Sophie knew instantly it was Marcus's mother. They had the same eyes. Mom, Marcus kissed her cheek. This is Sophie. Sophie. Margaret Stone clasped both of Sophie's hands with genuine warmth. Finally, I've been dying to meet the woman who made my son smile again. Mrs. Stone. It's a pleasure, Sophie said, trying to channel her inner elegance. Margaret, sweetheart. And let me just say, you're even more beautiful in person than in all those magazine photos. Sophie blushed. You're too kind. Edward. Margaret called out to a distinguished man across the room. Come meet our future daughter-in-law. Edward Stone was an older version of Marcus, serious, but with kind eyes. He greeted Sophie politely, but she could feel him studying her carefully. So, you're the famous secretary who won over our CEO, Edward said. Technically, I won him over with a song about political cats, Sophie replied with a smile. It wasn't exactly a master plan. Margaret burst out laughing. I love it. Marcus has always been so serious. He needs someone to loosen him up. Mom, Marcus murmured, clearly embarrassed. What? It's true. Margaret turned to Sophie. Did you know when he was little, he used to give business presentations with his stuffed animals? Margaret, Edward warned gently, but he was smiling. I need to hear this story, Sophie said. Visibly delighted, he was 7 and held a meeting with all his teddy bears to discuss equal toy distribution in the bedroom. Margaret shared proudly. He even made charts. Sophie looked at Marcus, who was now visibly red. Charts at 7? It was a phase, he muttered. It was adorable, Margaret corrected. He's always been special, and now he's found someone just as special. Sophie felt a sudden pang of guilt. Margaret's joy was real, and Sophie was lying to her face. The night continued pleasantly. Sophie mingled with Marcus's relatives, heard more adorable and embarrassing childhood stories, and even made Edward Stone laugh with her dramatic imitation of the Japanese investor's accent. But just as she was reaching for a glass of champagne, a voice froze her in place. What a coincidence seeing you here. Sophie turned. There was Isabella, radiant in a red dress that probably cost more than Sophie's yearly rent. Isabella, Marcus said tightly. Hello. Love birds. Isabella's smile was icy. How's it going? Still playing house? Excuse me? Sophie frowned. Isabella stepped closer, dropping her voice in a mock conspiratorial tone. Did you two meet in HR or on the set of Make Believe? Sophie felt her stomach twist but kept her face neutral. I'm not sure I follow. Oh, please, Isabella laughed softly. Do you really think anyone's buying this act? A nobody secretary who suddenly becomes the fiancé of New York's most unattainable CEO. Marcus moved forward. Isabella, I'm just being realistic, she interrupted sharply. And I happen to have proof that your darling Sophie is a professional opportunist. Messages, shady contacts, a very interesting background. Sophie knew it was a lie, but Isabella said it with such calm, venomous certainty that even she started to doubt herself for half a second. You have a choice, Isabella continued, savoring every word. Admit this little love story is a farce, or tomorrow everyone will know exactly who Sophie Carter really is. Sophie took a deep breath and smiled. Isabella, sweetheart, you're making a lot of noise over nothing. You know what I think? I think you miss Marcus, and you're making up stories for attention. It's kind of desperate. Isabella's face turned crimson. How dare you? I dare because I have just enough class to recognize unnecessary drama, Sophie said, still smiling. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to dance with my fiancé. She took Marcus's hand and led him away from Isabella, though she could feel his tension radiating through his grip. He was shaken. An hour later, in the car outside Sophie's apartment, silence sat heavy between them. She could be bluffing, Sophie said, trying to lift the mood. And if she's not, then we face it together. It's not like we're actual criminals. Marcus pulled up to her building but didn't make a move to unlock the doors or say goodbye. Sophie, he began. Marcus, look at me. She turned to him, eyes steady. It doesn't matter what Isabella does. We're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. There was something different in the air now. The tension had shifted. It wasn't about the lie anymore, or Isabella, or the media. It was something else, something real. Marcus was looking at her like he was truly seeing her for the first time. You're incredible, he murmured. I know, Sophie said with a quiet smile, softer than usual. He leaned in first. This time, it wasn't an accident. Not for a camera, not for the parade. It was real. And when their lips met, Sophie felt something click, like a final puzzle piece sliding perfectly into place. Moments later, they were climbing the stairs to Sophie's apartment, still kissing, laughing, and fumbling with keys and shoes and each other, falling into something they couldn't name yet but didn't need to. That night, for the first time, they didn't pretend. The next morning, Sophie woke up to the smell of coffee and burnt toast. She found Marcus in her tiny kitchen, frowning at the toaster like it had personally offended him. Good morning, she said, voice still thick with sleep. Good morning. He smiled. Hope you like your eggs slightly charred. Your kitchen is challenging, Sophie laughed, walking up behind him. It's perfect. And for the first time in a very long time, nothing she said was pretend. They spent the entire Sunday holed up in Sophie's apartment, eating takeout pizza and watching terrible romantic comedies on cable. It was surreal, watching the most feared CEO in New York lounging on her old couch, laughing at a cheesy 90 seconds rom-com. You know, I've seen this movie like 15 times, Sophie said, lying against his shoulder. Why would anyone watch the same movie 15 times? Marcus asked, genuinely baffled. Because sometimes you need something predictable. something where you know everything's going to be okay. He looked at her with that quiet softness she was starting to recognize. How do you make simple things sound so deep? Natural talent, she said, stealing a slice of his pizza. That and the ability to eat other people's food without guilt. They both laughed, and for the first time in weeks, neither of them was faking a thing. On Monday morning, Sophie stepped into the office, humming softly. She could still taste the goodbye kiss Marcus had given her just before they'd split off onto different floors of the building, keeping up appearances. But her smile was completely real. But the moment she stepped into the office, she knew something was terribly wrong. Emily ran up to her. "Sophie, did you see it?" "See what?" Emily showed her phone. The screen was full of angry comments and screenshots of conversations Sophie had never had. Sophie Carter. The truth about the gold digger who fooled the CEO. Exposing messages. Reveal a plan to scam. A millionaire, greedy secretary had everything planned from day one. Sophie took the phone with trembling hands. The screenshots showed conversations between her and people she didn't know, talking about how to catch the rich CEO and pretend to love him to get his money. The messages looked real, with her pictures and everything. "I never wrote this," Sophie murmured, feeling the world spin. "Emily, I swear I never—" "I know you wouldn't do this," Emily said quickly, "but it's everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. It's gone viral." Sophie kept reading. The comments were cruel. Obviously a scam. Nobody becomes Cinderella out of nowhere. Poor man, tricked by his own employee. This woman is an embarrassment to all honest secretaries. Her phone started ringing non-stop, unknown numbers, probably journalists looking for statements. "Miss Carter," Patricia showed up, looking like she was attending a funeral. "The board wants to speak with you right away." Sophie went up to the meeting room, her legs unsteady. 5 men in suits were waiting, all with serious expressions. Marcus stood in the corner, visibly upset. "Miss Carter," said Robert Thompson, whom she recognized from previous contracts. "I'm sure you've seen the allegations. They're lies," Sophie said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I never wrote those messages." "Maybe so," Thompson replied coldly. "But whether they're real or not, they're doing serious damage to the company's reputation. Our phones haven't stopped ringing with worried journalists and investors." Another board member spoke up. "The company's stock dropped 2% this morning. We need immediate damage control." Sophie looked at Marcus, hoping he would say something, anything, but he just stood there, silent, with a tortured look on his face. "Therefore," Thompson continued, "we're asking for your immediate resignation. We also suggest that you publicly end your relationship with Mr. Stone." "Robert," Marcus spoke for the first time. "Maybe this is too hasty." "Marcus," Thompson cut him off. "You're a smart man. You know this has to be done to protect everything we've built." Sophie felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't just the unfairness of the situation. It was seeing Marcus hesitate, unsure if he should stand up for her. She stood up slowly. "It doesn't have to be a resignation. I'll step down." "Sophie," Marcus began. "It's okay." She forced a smile. "Business is business." Sophie took off her badge and placed it on the table. "Thank you for letting me live my little soap opera for a while. Now I'll go back to being an extra." She walked out of the room without looking back. Even as she heard Marcus calling her name, Patricia ran after her in the hallway. "Sophie, dear, I'm so sorry." "It's okay, Patricia." Sophie picked up the few belongings from her desk. It was too good to last. 2 hours later, Sophie was back in her Brooklyn neighborhood, carrying a box with her things and trying not to cry on the street. Her neighbor, Mrs. Ellen, was watering the plants. "Sophie, what's that look on your face, dear?" "Hi, Mrs. Ellen. Just a change of plans. You're on the news, you know. They're saying you're a gold digger, but I told Harold that girl doesn't have a mean bone in her body." Sophie forced a smile. "Thanks for believing in me." In the days that followed, Sophie went back to her old routine. She resumed teaching music at the local community school, where the kids didn't know her as anything other than Miss Sophie, who teaches fun songs. "Miss Sophie," shouted 6-year-old Liam, "can you teach that cat song again?" "Of course, Liam." Sophie picked up the out-of-tune guitar. "But today, let's try a new version. How about the funky mayor dog?" The kids laughed and clapped, and for the first time in days, Sophie was able to momentarily forget the pain in her chest. Meanwhile, across town, Marcus couldn't focus on anything. He was in his 3rd meeting of the day and hadn't heard a single word. "Marcus?" One of the investors called. "Do you agree with the proposal?" "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" That night, alone in his luxurious apartment, Marcus stared out the window and could only think about Sophie. About how she sang out of tune in the shower, how she ate pizza like it was her last meal on earth, how she made him laugh without even trying. He caught himself smiling at the memory of when she called the tycoon Mr. Mustache, and then the tears started. 4 weeks later, Sophie was teaching a class when she started to feel strange, dizzy, nauseous, with a weird feeling in her stomach. "Miss Sophie, are you okay?" asked 7-year-old Chloe. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just need a minute." Sophie rushed to the bathroom and threw up. Then, she sat there on the cold floor, trying to understand what was going on. The next morning, she was at the doctor's office, nervous. "Well, Sophie?" "Doctor," Lopez said with a smile, "I have news for you. You're pregnant." About 3 weeks along, the world stopped. "Pregnant?" Sophie repeated, like the word was in another language. "Yes, congratulations. Does the father know yet?" Sophie shook her head, still in shock. "No, I'm not going to tell him." "Why not?" Sophie thought about Marcus hesitating in the boardroom, the way he didn't stand up for her, the cruel comments online calling her a gold digger. "Because I don't want anyone to think I'm doing this for money. I'll raise the baby on my own." "Doctor," Lopez frowned. "Sophie, raising a child alone is hard. If the father is a good man—" "He is," Sophie interrupted, the tears finally coming. "He's a wonderful man. That's why I can't tell him, not right now." That night, Marcus was at home, looking at a photo of Sophie on his phone, the only one he had saved, taken during the magazine photo shoot. She was laughing at something he had said, and her smile lit up the whole picture. He closed his eyes and could hear her voice singing, "Vote for the cat. He's the king of morale. He meows in the Senate. He's sensational." For the first time in 20 years, Marcus Stone cried. Not the quiet tears he had shed when he lost his brother, but the deep regret of letting the love of his life walk away without fighting for her. Marcus couldn't sleep. At 4 inches the morning on Tuesday, he was at the office, surrounded by piles of documents and 2 cups of cold coffee. He had spent the entire night doing something he should have done weeks ago, digging deep into the accusations against Sophie. Hiring a digital investigation firm had cost a small fortune, but the results were worth every penny. The message screenshots were fake, expertly fabricated, but fake. The dates didn't match. The metadata showed signs of tampering, and the digital trail led straight to one source: Isabella. Marcus looked at the report for the 10th time, feeling a mix of anger and relief. Sophie was innocent. She had always been innocent, and he had let her go without defending her. At 8:00 inches the morning, Patricia arrived and found Marcus still there, looking like he hadn't slept at all. "Mr. Stone, did you sleep here?" "Patricia, call an emergency meeting with the entire board. Now. It's 8:00 inches the morning. Some of them aren't even in yet. Call them. Tell them it's urgent. And call our legal team, too. We're suing someone today." An hour later, the same 5 men who had demanded Sophie's resignation were seated in the boardroom, clearly annoyed at being called in with such short notice. "Marcus," said Thompson, adjusting his tie, "I hope this is truly urgent. I canceled an important meeting to be here." Marcus placed a thick folder on the table. "Gentlemen, we've discovered that Sophie Carter is completely innocent." The silence was immediate. "What do you mean?" asked another board member. Marcus opened the folder and began handing out copies of the report. The messages were fake, digitally created by Isabella Hampton, my ex-girlfriend, in an attempt to ruin Sophie's reputation and drive us apart. Thompson picked up the report and started flipping through it. "This is substantial evidence." "It's irrefutable evidence," Marcus corrected him. "You demanded the resignation of an innocent employee based on elaborate lies. More than that, you made me doubt someone He hesitated. "Someone I love." The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Marcus, please understand our position," Thompson began. It seemed too convenient to question," Marcus interrupted. "And we failed. I failed." He stood and walked to the window. "That's why I'm announcing some immediate changes. First, our legal team will file a lawsuit against Isabella Hampton for defamation, slander, and emotional damages. Second, Sophie Carter will be rehired with a promotion and a significant pay raise. Third, we'll implement new policies to protect employees from false accusations." "And what if she doesn't want to come back?" one of the members asked. Marcus smiled for the first time in days. "Then I'll have to convince her." That afternoon, Marcus stood in front of a group of reporters in the company's press room. Patricia had managed to organize a press conference in record time. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Marcus began, surprisingly calm, I called this conference to clarify some incorrect information that has recently been circulating. Cameras flashed as he spoke. Sophie Carter, who was unfairly accused of being a gold digger, is completely innocent. The so-called evidence against her was fabricated, and we now have conclusive proof of that. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Stone, does that mean your relationship is real? Marcus took a deep breath. It was now or never. Sophie Carter is not a fraud. She's the most genuine person I've ever met. She's funny, smart, brave, and has the rare ability to make anyone smile, even on their worst days. He paused, thinking about all the times Sophie had brightened his world. She's the only person who's made me truly smile in the past 20 years. And yes, I'm completely in love with her. The buzz among the journalists was immediate. Marcus continued, if she forgives me for doubting her, I intend to spend the rest of my life proving how much she means to me. The press conference made headlines on every news channel in New York within hours. Meanwhile, Sophie was at the community school, trying to teach a group of hyperactive kids how to play the xylophone. The noise was deafening, but at least it drowned out her thoughts. Miss Sophie, shouted 5-year-old Ava, can you sing that song about the political cat again? Of course, sweetheart. Sophie forced a smile, but let's try a calmer version today. My stomach's not feeling too great. Actually, the morning sickness had turned into all-day sickness, and Sophie was starting to worry whether she'd be able to keep her job if she kept running to the bathroom every 2 hours. Mrs. Grace, the school principal, appeared at the door. Sophie, dear, you have a call in the office. Sophie walked to Mrs. Grace's small, cluttered office, wondering who it could be. Maybe the doctor with some test results. Hello, Sophie. It's me, Emily. Emily? Sophie brightened at the sound of her former coworker's voice. How did you get my number? I asked Patricia. Sophie, did you see the press conference? What press conference? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus held a press conference today. He said you're innocent, that the messages were fake. And he said he's in love with you, in front of the entire press. Sophie's knees went weak. He said what? It's on every channel. He defended you publicly. He sued his ex. And he basically declared eternal love on national TV. Sophie sank heavily into Mrs. Grace's chair. Emily, I have to go. Thanks for calling. Sophie. Wait, but Sophie had already hung up. She sat there in the quiet office, trying to process what she just heard. Marcus had declared his love publicly. He had risked his image, his company, everything for her. And she was pregnant with his child and couldn't tell him. An hour later, Marcus was driving through the streets of Brooklyn for the first time in his life. The GPS had led him to an area he only knew from corporate charity reports. The Esperanza Community School was a low, simple building with an old playground in the yard and a front wall that could use a fresh coat of paint. Marcus parked and sat in the car for a few minutes, watching. Through the windows, he could see Sophie with a group of children, animatedly gesturing while holding an out-of-tune guitar. She was singing, of course, even from a distance. Even through the glass, he could see her passion, her energy, the way the kids adored her. He got out of the car and walked closer to the window. Sophie was in the middle of a kid-friendly version of some song she had probably just made up on the spot. The little bird wants to fly high, but first it has to learn. The kids laughed and tried to mimic the sound. Sophie was making big, silly gestures, pretending to be a clumsy bird tripping over its own wings. It was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever seen in his life. At that moment, Sophie looked out the window and saw him. She froze in the middle of the song, the guitar almost slipping from her hands. Miss Sophie, one of the kids called. Why did you stop? Sophie quickly looked away. Nothing, sweethearts. Let's keep going. But her voice was shaky, and Marcus could tell she was shaken. He went back to the car, knowing he had shown up at the wrong time. Sophie needed space, time, and he needed a better plan than just showing up and hoping she would forgive him. That night at home, Marcus looked at his phone a dozen times, tempted to call Sophie. But he knew he needed something bigger, something special. Something that showed he truly understood who she was, what really mattered to her. He thought about the kids at the school, about the way Sophie lit up when she was with them. He thought about that silly political cat song that had changed his life. He thought about how to make Sophie smile again. And then he had an idea, a completely crazy, embarrassing idea, probably doomed to fail, perfect for Sophie Carter. Marcus picked up the phone and started making calls. He had a grand gesture to plan, and only 24 hours to put it all together. Patricia, he said when she answered, I need you to get me a costume. Yes, a costume. and a portable sound system, and maybe some emergency singing lessons. "Mr. Stone, are you okay?" Marcus smiled, imagining the expression Sophie would make the next day. "I'm great, Patricia. For the first time in a long time, I'm great." Tomorrow, he was going to win back the love of his life, even if it meant making a fool of himself in front of an entire school. For Sophie, it was worth it. The next morning, Sophie arrived at Esperanza Community School, still thinking about the image of Marcus standing outside. He had looked so out of place in that neighborhood, with his expensive suit and imported car, like a prince lost in a fairy tale. "Miss Sophie!" shouted Liam, running up to her as soon as she walked into the classroom. "Are you going to teach us a new song today?" "Of course, sweetheart," Sophie said, trying to push thoughts of Marcus out of her mind. "How about we make up a song about dancing dinosaurs?" The kids cheered. There were 12 of them, between 5 and 8 years old, all children from working families in the neighborhood. Sophie had fallen in love with every single one of them. "Dancing dinosaurs?" laughed Chloe, age 7. "They don't have rhythm." "Oh, but you haven't met the Samba T-Rex," Sophie replied, picking up the out-of-tune guitar. "He's got the best moves in town." The kids burst into laughter, and Sophie started improvising a silly melody about dinosaurs doing dance performances. It was in the middle of the second verse, while she was pretending to tap dance like a brontosaurus, that the classroom door opened, and in walked a giant panda. A person-sized plush panda holding a wireless microphone and a small portable speaker. The kids went completely silent for exactly 3 seconds before exploding. "A panda! He has a microphone! He's going to sing!" Sophie let the guitar slip from her hands. She knew that posture, even hidden inside a panda costume. She knew the way he walked, even while trying to mimic a clumsy bear. "Marcus," she whispered in disbelief. The panda gave a shy wave and turned on the microphone. When he spoke, his voice came out muffled through the costume's head. "Hey kids, I'm the Love Panda. I'm here to sing a very special song for a very special person." Liam raised his hand. "Mr. Panda, you sound nervous." "I am very nervous," Marcus admitted, and Sophie had to hold back a laugh, because the person I'm singing to is the most amazing in the world, and I messed things up with her. The panda turned to Sophie, who was still standing there, stunned. "Sophie, please forgive me for letting you go. I might not know how to sing, but I know the only song that makes sense now is you." Sophie felt her eyes fill with tears. He was really there, dressed as a panda, in front of a dozen kids, ready to make a fool of himself for her. "Marcus," she began. "Love Panda," Ava corrected excitedly. Marcus cleared his throat and began to sing. To Sophie's horror and delight, it was exactly the song she had sung on her first day of work. "Vote for the cat. He's the king of morale. He meows in the Senate. He's sensational." His voice was completely off-key. He messed up the lyrics twice, tripped over the panda costume's feet, and at one point nearly knocked over the microphone. But he kept singing with touching determination. "Are you seriously singing my made-up brega funk song?" Sophie asked, laughing and crying at the same time. "I am," Marcus replied, even more off-key, "and I'll keep singing it as many times as it takes, until you forgive me." The kids were ecstatic, clapping off-beat and trying to sing along. Chloe shouted, "Miss Sophie, your panda friend sings worse than you." "Hey," Sophie protested, "I sing beautifully." "No, you don't," all the kids said in unison, making Marcus laugh inside the costume. When he finished the song, Marcus turned off the microphone and with some effort removed the panda head. His hair was a mess, his face red from heat and effort. Then, still wearing the rest of the panda costume, he got down on one knee in front of Sophie. "Sophie Carter," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Will you marry me for real? No contract, no lies, no games, just love, true love. The kind that makes you want to sing songs about political cats for the rest of your life." The room fell completely silent. Even the children seemed to understand the importance of the moment. Sophie looked at him. This man who had left behind all his corporate dignity to come here, dressed as a panda, singing off-key to a classroom full of kids. "Only if you sing the chorus with me," she said, trying not to laugh, "and rhyme my name with spaghetti." Marcus panicked for a second. "Rhyme Sophie with spaghetti? That's impossible." "Then you'll have to get creative," Sophie replied. Crossing her arms, Marcus took a deep breath and began to improvise, still on one knee. "Sophie, you're better than spaghetti. Your smile makes me feel, confetti." The kids laughed so hard that Liam fell off his chair. Sophie couldn't hold it in anymore. She started laughing and crying at the same time, then ran to hug Marcus, who was still kneeling on the floor in the panda costume. "You are completely crazy," she said, kissing his cheek. "Crazy about you," he replied, holding her as if she might disappear. The kids surrounded them, jumping and shouting. "They're going to get married." "The panda's our friend now, Miss Sophie. Is he your panda boyfriend?" Liam tugged on the sleeve of Marcus's costume. "Mr. Panda, are you really crazy?" Marcus looked at Sophie, glowing in his arms. "I am crazy in love with this amazing woman." Sophie smiled and whispered in his ear, "For the record, you sing terribly." "I know. I'm going to need to hire a singing coach." "You don't need one." She kissed his cheek again. "I like your off-key voice. It's authentic." Ava raised her hand. "Miss Sophie, are you guys going to sing in our end-of-year show?" Sophie and Marcus looked at each other. "I think Mr. Marcus has other commitments, sweetie." "Actually," said Marcus, surprising even himself, "I'd love to sing in your show." The kids cheered again, and Mrs. Grace, the principal, appeared at the door to see what all the noise was about. "Sophie, dear, what is?" She stopped when she saw Marcus in the middle of the room, still half-dressed as a panda. Is everything okay here?" "Mrs. Grace, this is Marcus," said Sophie, trying to stay composed. "Marcus, this is Mrs. Grace, our principal." Marcus tried to stand up with some dignity, which wasn't easy given that he was still wearing the bottom half of a panda suit. "Nice to meet you. I was giving the kids a musical performance." Mrs. Grace looked at him, then at Sophie, then at the excited children. Well, it was certainly memorable. 15 minutes later, Sophie and Marcus walked out of the school hand in hand. Marcus had managed to get out of the costume and looked like a normal human being again, though his hair was still a mess. "You know this is going to be the talk of the school for at least a year," said Sophie. "I can live with that," replied Marcus, giving her hand a squeeze. "I can live with anything as long as I'm with you." They stopped next to Marcus's car, neither of them wanting to break the moment. "I promise to smile every day," Marcus said suddenly. "Even if it's just to annoy you." Sophie laughed and pulled him closer. "And I promise to keep singing off-key, just to make you laugh." They kissed right there on the sidewalk in front of the school, with a few kids peeking through the windows and making ooh sounds. When they pulled apart, Sophie held his face in her hands. "Marcus Stone, you are the craziest, most handsome, most off-key man I've ever met, and I'm madly in love with you." "I love you too," he replied. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." They got in the car, and Marcus started the engine. He was just pulling out when Sophie sighed. "Oh, before I forget, we're going to need a bigger car." Marcus frowned, focused on traffic. "What do you mean?" "This car has plenty of space for two." Sophie took a deep breath. "It was now or never. Because I'm pregnant." Marcus hit the brakes so hard the car behind them honked in frustration. "You're what?" "Pregnant. 4.5 weeks. To be exact." Marcus immediately pulled into the first parking spot he saw, which happened to be in front of a candy store. He sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process the news. "Pregnant," he repeated, like the word was in another language. "And before you ask," Sophie continued quickly, "yes, it's yours. And no, I wasn't going to tell you because I didn't want anyone thinking I was trying to trap you after all that Isabella drama. But now that you've shown up at my school dressed as a panda, singing about a cat, I kind of changed my mind about hiding it." Marcus stared at her. "You were going to raise our child alone?" "Children," Sophie corrected nervously. "It's twins." Marcus's expression was priceless. His eyes widened, his mouth dropped open, and he slowly leaned back in his seat, like he was fainting in slow motion. "Twins," he murmured. "Two babies, two little people who are going to sing off-key like their mother." "Hey," Sophie protested. But she was smiling. Marcus suddenly sat upright and pulled Sophie into a passionate kiss. "This is amazing. It's the best gift I've ever received. Better than any contract, any deal, anything." "Really?" Sophie asked, relieved. "Sophie, I spent 20 years not smiling, not feeling truly happy. You not only made me smile again, but now you're giving me 2 more reasons to smile every single day." He kissed her still flat belly. "Hi, babies. I'm your daddy. And you have the most amazing mommy in the world." Sophie laughed, tears running down her cheeks. "Are you sure you're ready for 2 babies who will probably inherit my talent for creating chaos?" Marcus held her face. "Sophie, I've faced hostile boardrooms, tough investors, and Isabella Hampton. 2 babies can't possibly be more challenging than that. You don't know the Carter family genetics. Sophie replied. We've been troublemakers since birth. Marcus laughed and kissed her again. Then it'll be an adventure, and I can't wait to start. A week later, Sophie was standing in the middle of Marcus's living room, surrounded by boxes, and wondering how she had managed to accumulate so much stuff in such a small apartment. Marcus, she shouted, why do you have 15 remote controls? His voice came from the kitchen. Every device has its own remote. Why do you need a dedicated remote for the towel warmer? Sophie asked, holding up a sleek black remote that looked like it could launch a spaceship. 2 warm towels, Marcus replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Sophie shook her head, laughing. 3 days living in Marcus's penthouse, and she was still discovering gadgets she never knew existed. Marcus, have you seen my toothbrush? He called out, emerging from the kitchen with flour on his nose. The blue ones in the master bathroom, the white ones in the guest bathroom, and the electric ones charging by the coffee maker. Sophie answered without looking up from unpacking a box of her books. Marcus paused, staring at her. How are you more organized in my house than I am? It's a gift, she shrugged, along with my talent for finding your lost socks. That evening, they had an important dinner. Marcus had insisted on cooking for his parents himself, which Sophie found both endearing and potentially disastrous. Marcus, are you sure you can handle lasagna? She asked, watching him wrestle with a lump of dough that seemed to have a vendetta. Absolutely, he said, flour now dusting his hair like snow. YouTube tutorials are practically Michelin star training. Woohoo! Sophie dipped a spoon into the sauce he was stirring. Sweetheart, you used sugar instead of salt. Marcus froze. No way. And this, she pointed at the spice jar, is cinnamon, not oregano. He looked at the jars like they'd betrayed him. How do you know this? Because I have taste buds. And your lasagna tastes like a dessert pizza. 2 hours later, when Margaret and Edward Stone arrived, the kitchen resembled a war zone, but dinner was salvaged thanks to Sophie's quick fixes. Marcus, darling, Margaret said, kissing his cheek. What a lovely aroma. Full disclosure. Sophie saved the meal, Marcus admitted, brushing flour off his shirt. I almost served cinnamon lasagna. Edward chuckled. At least you tried. Your mother spent decades trying to teach me to cook, and I still burn toast. How do you burn toast? Sophie asked, genuinely curious. I get distracted, and the toaster becomes a science experiment, Edward said with a grin. Sophie glanced at Marcus. That explains your family's culinary legacy. Dinner flowed smoothly, with conversation as warm as the now correctly seasoned lasagna. Margaret peppered Sophie with questions about her childhood, her music teaching, and her plans. Edward, more reserved, asked thoughtful questions but showed his approval with quiet smiles. Sophie, dear, Margaret said, slicing into her lasagna, you've brought a spark to Marcus we haven't seen in years. Mom, Marcus muttered, cheeks reddening. It's true, Margaret insisted. He called me last week to share a joke you told him. A joke? Edward raised an eyebrow. Marcus doesn't do jokes. Sophie blushed. It wasn't a big deal. She said I'm like a GPS, Marcus explained, a smile tugging at his lips. Always know the destination, but never enjoy the journey. Edward roared with laughter. That's perfect. Over dessert, a store-bought pie, Sophie had wisely insisted on. Marcus and Sophie shared their big news. We have something to tell you, Marcus started, his voice a little shaky. Margaret dropped her fork. You're setting a wedding date? I knew it. Actually, Sophie said, squeezing Marcus's hand, we are getting married, but there's more. More? Edward leaned forward. Marcus took a deep breath. You're going to be grandparents. Margaret let out a shriek that could have shattered glass. A baby. Edward, we're going to be grandparents. Twins, Sophie added, grinning. Margaret nearly toppled her chair in excitement. Twins, like Ethan and Marcus. Oh, it's fate. She started pacing, hands waving. I'll need to redecorate the guest rooms. 2 cribs, 2 car seats, double the onesies. Margaret, Edward said, laughing. They're not born yet. Exactly. I need to prepare now. Sophie, are you taking prenatal vitamins? Eating enough greens? Seeing your doctor regularly? Mom. Marcus tried to interject. And names, Margaret continued, undeterred. Have you thought about names? No trendy nonsense, please. Maybe Henry and Helen, or James and Jane. Margaret. Edward said gently. Oh, and I'll teach them violin. Margaret declared. And Sophie, you'll teach them singing. They'll be musical prodigies. Sophie looked at Marcus, amused. I think we've unleashed Grandmazilla. Marcus nodded, grinning. Margaret finally sat down, still buzzing. I'm sorry, I'm just... I've dreamed of grandkids forever. No apologies needed, Sophie said warmly. It's beautiful how much you already love them. Edward stood and hugged Sophie. Welcome to the family. Officially. 2 weeks later, it was their wedding day. Sophie had insisted on an outdoor ceremony in Prospect Park, with her community school kids singing in the choir. A public park? Margaret had asked, baffled. We could book the plaza's grand ballroom. The park, Sophie said firmly. With the kids singing, a picnic afterward, and no pretension. Now, behind a cluster of trees, serving as a makeshift dressing room, Sophie adjusted her simple white dress, elegant, but undeniably her, Miss Sophie. Liam ran up, his tiny suit slightly crooked, but adorable. We're ready to sing. Perfect, sweetheart, Sophie said. When I reach the altar, you start the song we rehearsed. The love song, Chloe shouted, joining the other 11 choir kids. Sophie had written a special song for the ceremony, blending her quirky style with heartfelt emotion about finding love amid life's chaos. Emily arrived, radiant in her bridesmaid dress. Sophie, it's time. Sophie took a deep breath. How do I look? Like Marcus's wildest dream, Emily said. I hope so. I'm kind of attached to his goofy smile now. The music began not a traditional march, but Sophie's composition, played by a string quartet and sung by the kids. You came as a surprise in the middle of my off-key song. Sophie walked down the aisle of chairs, her eyes locked on Marcus at the altar. He looked impeccable in his tuxedo, but it was his tearful smile that caught her heart. You're stunning, he whispered as she reached him. You're not half bad yourself, she replied, adjusting his tie with a grin. Margaret sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes. Edward was beside her, filming with his phone. Behind them were company colleagues, neighborhood friends, and Mrs. Grace from the school. The pastor, a warm man Sophie knew through the school, began, We're here to celebrate Sophie and Marcus. Proof that opposites attract. The crowd chuckled softly. Sophie, your vows? The pastor prompted. Sophie took Marcus's hands. Marcus Stone, when we met, you were like a grumpy statue in a suit, but I found a sweet, quietly funny man who'd wear a panda costume for love. Laughter rippled through the guests. I promise to sing to you until we're old and creaky, even if my voice sounds like a dying printer. I'll make you laugh daily, even if it's at my kitchen disasters, and I'll love you as you are half robot. All wonderful. Marcus's eyes glistened. Sophie Carter. You stormed into my life with a song about political cats and flipped my world upside down. You showed me laughing isn't betrayal, joy isn't weakness, and the best things come in chaotic packages. He took a breath. I promise to smile every day, even if it's just to see you roll your eyes. I'll support your wild dreams, your silly songs, and your knack for nicknaming tycoons, and I'll love you and our kids with all I've got. Rings? The pastor asked. Liam sprinted forward with the rings on a pillow but tripped, nearly dropping them. Sophie and Marcus laughed, and Marcus helped him up. Happens to the best of us, buddy, he said, ruffling Liam's hair. They exchanged rings, vowing to love through joy and sorrow, wealth and poverty, health and sickness. I pronounce you husband and wife, the pastor said. Marcus, kiss your bride. The kiss sparked applause, cheers from the kids, and whistles from co-workers. At the picnic reception, Marcus shocked everyone by dancing awkwardly, but with gusto singing off-key with Sophie and tripping during their waltz, nearly toppling half the guests. He's not afraid to look silly anymore, Margaret whispered to a guest. Sophie brought my son back. As the sun set, Sophie tossed the bouquet over her shoulder. Emily lunged, but it landed in Mrs. Grace's hands, who blushed furiously. Under a tree, Sophie and Marcus watched the kids play. So, Mrs. Stone, Marcus said, how's it feel to be married? Same, but with better jewelry, Sophie teased. You, Mr. Stone? Happier than I ever thought possible. Sophie felt a flutter in her belly, tiny kicks. Marcus, she said, guiding his hand to her stomach. His eyes widened. They're kicking. I feel them both. Sophie laughed at his awestruck expression. They're probably dancing to our wedding playlist. Marcus kissed her belly. Hey babies, today was epic. You've got the coolest mom ever. Sophie cupped his face. And the most loving dad in the universe. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sophie and Marcus stayed there, smiling, feeling their twins move, surrounded by their unlikely family of friends and kids. For the first time in forever, everything was exactly right.